There's only one movie that I consider to be a true timeless classic. It's the perfect combination of action, romance, drama, comedy, and just an overall amazing storyline. The name of this movie is Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump is what I grew up watching, and it never seemed to fail that no matter how bad of a day I was having, watching Forrest Gump would just make it so much better. Something about the fact that this man was able to do so many great things regardless of the trials that he was facing in his life, and was able to do it in a way that really made you reevaluate the way that you were living your life was just so crazy to me. But throughout the entire movie of Forrest Gump, there's these three kind of main ideas that continue to pop up, and they are that life is like a box of chocolates, keep on running, and that's all I got to say about that. Which to me translates into bad things are going to happen to you, but you have to push on and you have to let it go. These ideas became evident to me through the actions of my cousin Kenneth. He was my best friend in the entire world. Where he went, I followed, to the point that people legitimately thought that he and I were brothers. I idolized him, and I don't regret it for a single second. But if there was one thing that you needed to know about Kenneth and I, it's that every single Friday night during the fall, we were going to be at that Roosevelt High School football game. And before we would ever even get out of the car, my mother would always tell us the exact same set of rules. She would say, you have to check in with me every 20 minutes, and you are not allowed to leave that gate once you get in. For years and years and years, Kenneth and I followed these rules to a T, with the exception of only one night. See, one of Kenneth's friends came up to us and he was like, hey, Kenneth, you ought to come with me back to my house. And Kenneth was like, okay, so we started going. I was like, whoa, dude, you're not supposed to go out there. Mom's going to get really mad at you. You cannot leave that gate. To which Kenneth started telling me the story about how his friend had this very special driver's license that required that if he was going to be driving, somebody else had to be riding with him. Then Kenneth offered something to me that I never really saw coming. He said, Blake, you can come with us if you'd like. I thought about it for a second, but then in the fear of the repercussions of my mother, I decided, you know what, I think I'll go ahead and stay back. I'll vouch for you if Mom asks, you went to the concession stand. As Kenneth was walking away that evening, I never could have imagined that would have been the last conversation that he and I would ever have. Because he left the gate, got in a rollover accident, and passed away. Over the next several days, I went over to his parents' house to help them in the grieving process, and I had to look them in the eyes knowing that I could have stopped this tragedy. For years and years and years, I blamed myself over the death of my cousin, but I refused to tell anybody of the actual events that occurred that evening. My heart hurt as I thought of how I could have stopped this. How if I only would have had the voice to stand up and say, no, you cannot go, I wouldn't be having a hole in my heart from where my best friend, my cousin, and their son used to be. But now looking back on that moment in my life, I realize that sometimes bad things are just going to happen to you. This happened with Forrest Gump whenever his mother and his wife passed away. He looked back on both of these times with sorrow, but at the same time acceptance. He remembered them, but accepted the fact that they weren't coming back. The most famous line in the entire movie of Forrest Gump is that life is like a box of chocolates. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you today that while life may be like a box of chocolates, it ain't always sweet. And whether you lost somebody very important in your life like Kenneth was to me, or some other tragedy has occurred to you, even though you are feeling that grief in your heart might seem unbearable, your first step to getting better is to accept the fact that bad things are going to happen. That next fall, I got super involved in all kinds of extracurricular activities. I'm talking, I was doing summer pigs, I was in the marching band, and on top of both of those things, I was also playing football. I would show up in the morning to school at around 7 a.m., and I wouldn't go home until 9 or 10 o'clock every single night. I was so focused on my school life that I didn't have time to think about anything else. I worked hard, and I refused to look back. Kind of like Forrest Gump whenever Jenny said that she didn't love him. Forrest Gump, rather than just sitting here and sulking in his own sorrow, he got up, went outside, and he went for a little run. And he ran for 3 years, 2 months, 14 days, and 16 hours. When reflecting on this time of his life, Forrest Gump said, Mama told me sometimes you had to put the past behind you before you can move on. Which I think is what his running and my activeness in high school was all about. You have to put the past behind you, and you have to push on. You cannot stop and sulk about the pain that you are feeling in your heart. You have to get up, and you have to move forward. And whether that means running across America, becoming super active in school, or just something that keeps your mind off everything else, you have to push on and not let the trials of yesterday affect who you are today. The evening before I left for state convention this last year, I finally decided that I was going to tell my parents about what actually occurred that evening. So we sat out on the back porch and I told them every single event preceding my cousin's death. I told them about how I felt like I had the power to stop him, and we sat out on the back porch for quite some time and we talked about faith. We talked about how everything happens for a reason, and I went to bed that night feeling content. But I knew that there was still one more thing that I needed to do. So the next morning, as I was leaving for Corpus Christi, I decided that I was going to stop by my cousin's grave. And I stopped there and I sat down and I talked to him for a while. I told him about everything that had happened since he passed away. I told him that I was running for state office. And then finally, I just sat back and I thought about all the good times that we had. I thought about the bad times. I thought about how much I missed him. And finally, I began thinking about that night that he passed away. Ladies and gentlemen, it took me until just a little over a year ago today to realize that nothing that I would have done that evening would have stopped my cousin from going out with his friends. Nothing that I would have done that evening would have stopped my cousin from being in the grave. It took me 5 years to realize that I still had not let my cousin go, so I did. I stood up with a new weight lifted off my shoulders, and I drove away that day, yes, with a tear in my eye, but for the first time in a long time, with a truly happy heart. This happened with Forrest Gump as he closed every single one of his stories. He would say, "Now that's all I got to say about that." Almost as a way to remind himself that he had let that memory go, that nothing that he could do or say now could change what had happened. You have to reflect on that moment that brought you tragedy, either by yourself or with someone that you trust. Let them know what you're feeling and get their opinion on what could help. Your pain, you have to accept the fact that your pain cannot bring them back, and nothing for that matter can bring them back. You acknowledge the past and you learn from it, but then you let it go. I tell you this story today not to make you feel bad for me, but so that you can learn from what I've gone through. Don't let the sadness of yesterday roll over into today. Don't be upset with yourself over things that you could not have changed, because ladies and gentlemen, bad things are going to happen to you. Push on from there. Work as hard as you can and don't look back. I was once told that if you live your life looking through that rearview mirror, then you're bound to come to a crash, which is why you have to let it go. Accept what has happened and learn from it, but don't constantly dwell on it. You are the best you that this world has ever seen. Are you going to allow yourself to dwell, or are you going to strive for something better? Learn from Forrest Gump and learn from my experiences that bad things are going to happen to you. And as long as you push on and you let it go, there is nothing in this world that could ever hold you back. And Texas FFA, that's all I got to say about that.